I'm like, would this part be included in the podcast? No.
I mean,
we'll find out later.
Welcome, everybody, to this week's episode of the Recreational Podcast. We are your hosts today. I'm Holly.
And I'm Casey.
And I'm Sean.
And this is the Recreational Podcast. I actually got a song for us that was uncopyrighted. I think it's perfect. Hold on. I'm going to play it for you guys. I meant to send it to you guys earlier. Hold on.
Oh, they're saying she didn't say use. You said recreational, so now people are confused. They think it's a whole new podcast and a reboot.
Oh my gosh, of course they do.
We're gonna start over. Do you have the music ready?
Hold on. All right, so we'll redo it.
Hello. 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 Will you talk, Sean? Say
Hello.
It. Okay.
Hello.
I'm just
Can
testing.
everyone hear me?
Okay, I just wanted to make sure my sound levels were good.
Okay. Hello, everyone, and welcome to this week's episode of the Recreational Use Podcast. We are your hosts. I'm Holly.
And I'm Casey.
And I'm Sean.
And this is Recreational Use. It like keeps on cutting out. Perfect.
Oh,
no. This sounds like, is that this tone? Is that from fucking Serial? Yeah. Okay, I thought.
Okay, I think I recognize it.
I was like, is that the Serial music? Is it actually uncopyrighted so we can use it?
No, editor, cut that out. Editor, edit that out. I'm sorry. I'm just stoned. I had to edit that. I had to put that in.
Keep it in. Keep it in. So.
Trigger warning. Today's topic. Trigger warning. Today's topic will depict acts of violence, drug use, and other content that could not be in a. Oh, fuck. Redo. Editor, cut that out. Trigger warning. Today's topic will depict acts of violence, drug use, and other content that could be inappropriate for certain audiences.
Content.
Okay, chat. Is everyone ready? Are you guys ready to start this?
Can we get a 1, 2, 3?
Can I get a 1, 2, 3 in chat, please?
Oh, and hold on, you guys. Check out all of our streams. This is the multi-Twitch link, so you can view all of our streams at once.
Multi-Twitch. Shanye West, 69.
Yes, check it out.
Holly Cannabis, Kaceytron.
Yes.
Yes, thank you, guys.
We're trying to really move mountains here, so we're
trying to grow our brand.
Mm-hmm.
Exactly. And okay, so I think we should maybe say something really quick. So I think like we're kind of starting to maybe figure out how we're still trying to figure out how we're going to make this podcast work, right? So right now, I think kind of like our concept is like every week, each of us is going to tell each other a story, right?
Mm-hmm.
Sometimes maybe, but and we're going to really try to start interacting more with chat, so it's a lot more, so it's more entertaining for you guys. We know that one of the reasons you guys like to be on Twitch is you guys like interacting with us, so we're going to be taking moments to kind of talk with you guys as well throughout this. So if you guys have any questions for us, we will have these moments that we kind of like pause and take any questions, and then we'll also be taking some questions at the end.
Be sure to donate them. I'm just kidding.
Yes, be sure to donate. Period. Yep. Okay. So I guess let's restart this. Editor can start from here.
Everybody hold your hands up like this for a second so they know this is like the video mark. Just like for a minute so then they'll know. Okay, we're ready.
Trigger warning. Today's topic will depict acts of violence, drug use, and other content that could be inappropriate for certain audiences.
Hello, today everybody. I thought we were going to do the podcast. Okay, hold your hands up again.
Let's do the intro. Okay. Editor, cut that out. Okay, so intro first.
Do the trigger warning. Do the intro, then the trigger warning. Okay.
Yes. Hello, everyone, and welcome to this week's episode of the Recreational Use Podcast. We are your hosts. I'm Holly.
I'm Casey.
And I'm Sean.
And this is for recreational use only.
I think I recognize that music from somewhere.
Trigger warning. Today's topic will depict acts of violence, drug use, and other content that could be inappropriate for certain audiences. Hi, chat. What's up, guys? How are you guys doing this week? Casey, Sean, how have you been?
Oh, so good. How are you?
I am great, and I'm so excited to talk to you guys about this week's topic.
I'm thrilled to be talking about it. What is the topic today?
So, today we are going to be talking about a series of experiments administered by the United States government known as Mkultra. So grab your tinfoil hats and listen in as we tell the story of one of the United States' most known secrets. Okay, guys. So
start us off. Yes.
So it was a cold December night in 1974. Eric Olson receives a call from his younger brother, actually, saying he just read this article in the Washington Post. It was published about their father. Eric rushed the newspaper stands to grab the paper. It was titled "Suicide Revealed." It exposed the story of an army scientist who was unwillingly drugged with LSD and jumped out the window days later. Eric knew at that moment the article was about his father, Frank Olson, who had died almost 20 years ago. The death was ruled as a suicide. Meanwhile, another article broke by the New York Times summarized the CIA program called Project Mkultra. There were horrible, inhumane experiments that were carried out by the CIA, but the CIA was adamant that no one was killed during these experiments. There were no deaths, except just one, a man who committed suicide in 1953 due to stress from work. For over 20 years, Eric and his family were totally in the dark about the death of their father, but now Eric was determined. Some even said he was obsessed to find answers about his father.
Okay, so when we first started this topic, I had absolutely no idea what Mkultra was about.
Oh, really?
I don't even know what I thought it was about. I do to a certain degree. I'm pretty sure that I thought it was just complete, like, conspiracy theory nonsense.
Oh, really?
I did.
Think a lot of people relate it to just conspiracy theories. Or even, like, pop culture. It's super popular in pop culture. Like, I think of Stranger Things. I'm not, like, a huge Stranger Things fan or anything, but I think that's, like, probably one of the most, like, recent depictions of Mkultra in, like, a TV show.
I didn't even watch that, so I had no idea.
Yeah, so I think that's supposed to be about, like, Mkultra. I honestly decided to pick this topic because all I really knew about it were the different like conspiracies around it. And I just knew it was like some sort of like CIA type thing gone wrong. But I didn't really know all the details, but like, I don't know. I thought it was really kind of important to talk about and go over kind of like in this era of like misinformation.
Yeah. What did you think, Sean? Did you know what MKUltra was, or?
I had heard about it. I thought of just kind of like the early days of LSD, I guess. That's like really all I knew about it. Like I didn't know who Frank Olson was before this.
See, I didn't even know it had anything to do with like LSD. I just thought it was like some conspiracy theory reference or something that people referenced whenever they were talking about conspiracy theories. I really had no idea.
Well, it's because like every conspiracy theorist is always like, it's MKUltra.
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
So like it really, I think it's like definitely to this point where nobody even knows the true story of MKUltra.
So Clambake 420 in my chat just said, the CIA is the most harmful cult to ever exist. They do nothing but fucked up shit and never for good reasons. And that's exactly what we're going to be talking about.
No, that's 100% true. 100% the case. And I think this story really, really depicts that. But to truly understand why MKUltra started, you have to understand what the United States was going through at the time. The Korean War had just ended and tensions were really high between the US and the Soviet Union. It was a time of real uncertainty in the United States and people were very, very scared. There was this whole idea of mind control and brainwashing, and it really frightened and scared the American public. Stories of these brainwashed former soldiers that left the United States armies to become communists during the Korean War, who were like going and revealing all of this private US intel. Really, like these stories dominated the headlines. There were big like New York Times best-selling books that were published at the time, and it was really, really popular. So this was a huge thing, very, very relevant. And you guys have probably seen this in movies and TV shows and that kind of like attitude depicted. But this made the United States determined to be able to combat brainwashing and, you know, this brain warfare that they were so scared of. And they officially launched Project MKUltra and made Sidney Gottlieb the head of it. Gottlieb was a poison expert who headed the chemical division of the CIA. He was known to be kind of a weird guy. He had a club foot, which prevented him from being able to serve in World War II. And he kind of walked with a limp, which according to some of his colleagues, it seemed like it kind of made him overcompensate for the work that he did now since he wasn't able to serve in the war. Like basically, he was the type of guy to really stop at nothing for the greater good for his country. If I'm putting it nicely, I guess. But if I'm being truthful, Gottlieb was a total psychopath. He administered all kinds of tests and inhumane experiments similar to the practices of the Nazis. In fact, he modeled it after it.
One of the most... Oh, sorry. Yeah. I was going to say, I even read that he actually worked alongside some of the Nazi scientists who had been, like, barred from the United States. Like, he would travel and, like, meet up with them, which was also, as a side note, very strange because he was an Orthodox Jew.
Right. Right.
So here he is just mingling with Nazi scientists. It's all very strange, but anyway.
And this was 100% funded by the United States government as well. So yes, like this was actually something that was documented too. It was well known that he was working with these former, you know, like Nazi scientists, and it was completely accepted because they thought that they had to talk to them to get their answers. Whatever they learned, the United States wanted to know. So that was their reasoning for it. But yeah, it was very odd because Gottlieb did grow up as an Orthodox Jew, and his family his family was from Germany, but they moved to the United States right kind of before
the Holocaust. Like, he very much so could have been a victim of his own experiments.
Yeah. 100%, which is one of the things that is definitely really interesting about him. But another thing, one of the most common things Gottlieb liked to experiment with was LSD. That was like his favorite drug. He believed it was the ultimate true serum, which was what the United States government was looking for at the time. He thought it could control someone's mind, or better yet, even wipe it clean, so they would forget what they did entirely. He was so fascinated by the drug that in 1951, he bought nearly the entire world's supply from this Swedish factory, laboratory that actually first created it. The goal of the CIA and Sidney Gottlieb with this Mkultra project was to create the perfect Manchurian candidate. And Gottlieb believed LSD was the answer.
What's a Manchurian candidate?
So a Manchurian candidate is basically somebody, typically that would be like a prisoner of war, that you could like brainwash and make switch sides and like go and get like, you know, enemy secrets and intel, and I like almost just like do whatever you wanted to do. And the idea is that they wouldn't even remember it afterwards. So just like completely brainwashed.
Something that they said that they wanted was they wanted to like basically they wanted to wipe the mind completely clean and start anew. So they had to destroy the old mind.
And that was something that was kind of popularized by another
pop culture. Oh, sorry.
That worked with Gottlieb.
But basically,
what was that, though?
When like they look to they would kind of go after people who weren't really able to say no, right?
Like equipped to.
Yeah, like they weren't equipped with the skills or the know-how to.
Well,
be like,
they would
no.
Definitely go.
They'd go after like lower income and like lower like poverty.
Yes.
Okay.
The CIA maintains modern capitalism. The CIA is watching this stream? Excuse me? I don't think it is. It's possible. But this is something that's like pretty widely covered. But whenever I was like writing all of this and reading into it, I was getting paranoid. Like I was. It's creepy. But Gottlieb, he would do these experiments on subjects both consenting and non-consenting. And this kind of brings us back to the story of Frank Olson. So Frank was a biochemist for the United States Army in the early 1950s. There's rumor that he was part of this project called Project Artichoke, but that's a totally different topic. But Frank was really good at what he did. He worked at Camp Detrick, a top secret CIA agency where he developed biowarfare agents like poisonous papers, these poisonous fountain pens. There was a lipstick that he made that if you like opened it and touched it to your lips, you would die like instantly. He created
to add to that, there was another thing that they made, and it was a anal suppository that was full of gadgets that you could use to like break out of jail, or like if you were like imprisoned or something.
Yes.
Did you hear about that one?
Yeah, yes. It's like there's so many rabbit holes you can go down with this. That's why I like whenever I told Casey and Sean, I was like, let's do this. I was like, be careful because there's a million rabbit holes to go down. It's insane. You can spend hours just on one. Oh my God. But it was definitely weird, like to think that the CIA was doing this, but like he made all these different things. He made this inhaler that was like that like made you inhale like a poisonous toxin. And I think it was even said or speculated, or I would have to look this up, but I think he was like one of the people that helped make anthrax. I'm not sure on that. But
no, that's something that that was something that Casey and I both heard, was that at least that he was like part of the anthrax creation.
Yes. I read another story like earlier today where he was talking about how a lot of, you know, the different like experiments he would carry out, like Frank Olson particularly, you know, a lot of the time their test subjects would be animals like monkeys and stuff like that. And he would feel especially bad or guilty when it was successful, meaning that the live animals died from like these different poisons and toxins he was making.
Right. I don't think Frank Olson was really the right guy for his job, like for what he was doing. He just had too big of a heart.
Too much of a conscience.
But he was good at it, though. But he started to kind of have like moral reservations about all of it when one of his developments was used without his consent. The poison was used on a group of like unwilling American civilians, and they all suffered a slow death that started with very flu-like symptoms. So this next part gets a little like fuzzy. There's like lots of names and dates, so just stay with me. But for whatever reason, blackmail, threats, or whatever, Frank stayed at Fort Detrick either way, despite the fact that he had all these moral misgivings. And on November 18th, 1953, Frank went on a retreat to Deep Creek Lake with 10 other colleagues, and none other than Sidney Gottlieb was there. That Thursday after dinner, Gottlieb unknowingly spiked the men's drinks with LSD, and once they finished, he told them that he had drugged them. The next day, Frank rushed to go home, actually leaving the retreat early. He told his wife that night he had made a terrible mistake, and that Monday he actually attempted to resign. Unfortunately, he was unable to do so. For whatever reason, hours after attempting to resign, he told his wife that he changed his mind. Instead, he told her that he was going to go see this doctor to help him with his mental state. So Frank leaves with this guy, Robert Lashbrook, another colleague of his. He actually leaves and misses Thanksgiving dinner to go see this doctor, Dr. Harold Abramson, who was on the CIA payroll. And he really wasn't much of like a doctor at all. He was actually a hypnotist, and he didn't have any real credibility to be dealing with somebody who really had severe mental issues.
Wait, so isn't that a conflict of interest?
Yeah. So the fact that the CIA was like having him go to somebody that was also on their payroll is definitely a conflict of interest, which is something we see that happens over and over and over again throughout this. But that's not all. So the next morning, at sometime around 2 a.m., Frank falls to his death from the 13th floor of the Hotel Statler. The hotel manager who was working at the time rushes outside just in time to see Frank in his final moments. He tries to mumble something, but before being able to say anything, Frank died. The hotel manager rushed inside. The body he found had fallen from room 1018A. The police showed up moments later to find Robert Lashbrook sitting on the toilet with his face in his hands. He told the police that he was asleep when it happened and he didn't know anything and he didn't see anything. But it gets even weirder. So the hotel manager was extremely unsettled by this and was kind of on this hunch. He goes and asks the switchboard operator if there had been any calls that were made to the room. And the switchboard operator says yes, and that she even eavesdropped because the calls were so short. She said the caller said, "Well, he's gone." And then on the other line, the person responded saying, "Well, that's too bad."
I have a letter that the hotel manager actually wrote to Frank Olson's wife, Alice. It reads, Dear Miss Olson, after reading the newspaper accounts on the tragic death of your husband, I felt compelled to write you. At the time of your husband's death, I was the assistant night manager at the Hotel Statler in New York and was at his side almost immediately after his fall. He attempted to speak, but his words were unintelligible. A priest was summoned and he was given the last rites. Having been in the hotel business for the last 36 years and witnessed innumerable unfortunate incidents, your husband's death disturbed me greatly due to the most unusual circumstances of which you are now aware. If I can be of any assistance to you, please do not hesitate to call upon me. My heartfelt sympathy to you and your family. Sincerely, Armand B. Pastor, General Manager.
Okay, so I had to look more into what this hotel manager had to say about that night, and I found this New York Times article that said, years later, the night manager recalled, in all my years in the hotel business, I never encountered a case where someone got up in the middle of the night, ran across a dark room in his underwear, avoiding two beds, and dove through a closed window with the shade and curtains drawn.
Like, isn't that just like, it doesn't make any sense. Like, make it make sense. Everything about this is so strange and just reeks of suspicion and just, it's all very, very shady.
Right. There's like a lot to really unpack with all of this. Like, first of all of these scientists going to this camp to experiment with LSD, having done a bit of experimenting myself, I guess I could say, I think that at the point where he was, unknowingly dosed with this LSD, having lived the kind of life that he had with, some of the different chemical weapons that he had developed that he knew had done harm, I just can't help but think, like, having done LSD and had all of that so heavy on you, I bet it really started to weigh on him a lot during his,
the
trip.
Set in.
No,
especially being on a drug like LSD, like, having done it, I cannot describe to you how awful I would feel if I were a person that had done those sort of things and taken, living life from someone, I guess.
This was just really months after this incident that happened in San Francisco, where not he killed, but the 10 people were killed. So, like, he had been, like, having issues with depression really for, like, the last year. And he had even stepped down from his position that was at the Army, but he was still working with the Army. I'm not 100% caught up to details on that, but I know he, like, had to step back because he was, like, kind of so, like, overwhelmed by it. And, like, everyone kind of said, like, the same thing about Frank, is that he, like, acted really, really weird, which I guess it just seems like that was, like, put on, like, almost like they were all in on it, right? Because it's like everyone acts weird on acid. Like, who are they to say that he was acting weird? I thought that was also something that was strange.
Well, he was probably nervous he would die. I mean, that would be in the back of my mind if I found out I had been drugged in, like, just a few months prior, 10 people had died from a drug that, I had helped administer.
Yeah, that's a good point as well. I mean, to reiterate, I do not think that he jumped out of that window himself. I mean, obviously, no. I don't. I think that he, kind of appeared to be, I guess, like a loose end for some of the other people, like, headlining these experiments. He was like, well, like, they were kind of like, well, what is Frank Olson going to go do and tell people? He just wants to resign now? What I mean?
I think it was, like, a lot to do to the fact of him also being tied to Project Artichoke, almost more than anything, like Project Mkultra almost seems like a cover-up for Project Artichoke, because what happened with Frank Olson and the things that went on during that time period is truly horrendous. Like, I mean, we're talking, the CIA and government killing our own people. That's the last thing they wanted to let out. So I don't know. All of this with like Frank Olson, I think he knew too much. And I think that's why he was killed ultimately. But, either way, Eric, the son I mentioned in the beginning, he was just 9 years old when he was awoken by his mother Alice at 4 a.m. when she tells him that his father is dead. Later that morning, two of Frank's colleagues who have claimed to have been close with him showed up at the Olsons' home to provide them with more answers about Frank's death. They explained to the Olsons that Frank fell or jumped from the hotel window. Everything sounded off to Alice. She had serious doubts about the entire situation. She said she never heard Frank mention one of the colleagues at all. It wouldn't be until years later the family would learn that it was actually Sidney Gottlieb. Now, at this time, Alice was just completely grief-stricken. And despite the fact that she had so many unanswered questions, she had to move on. She had 4 children to take of, but Eric could not move on. Fell or jumped. Because those two things have very two different explanations. And if he did jump, why? His mom had just talked to his dad that night. He was fine. Alice agreed there was no way Frank jumped. And if he fell, who pushed him? Or if he was pushed, who pushed him? But she was determined to be strong for her family. She even said to Eric multiple times, "You will never know what happened in that room." Eric never got all the answers he was looking for, but we will get back to that because this is just the tip of the iceberg.
So I didn't realize that one of the people who showed up at Eric's house after his dad died to kind of, I guess, like talk to the family was actually Sidney Gottlieb. That was one of the 2 people that showed up to like give them kind of an explanation of what had happened, which is also, very suspicious.
Telling.
Yeah, very telling.
It wasn't until years later that they realized this, and it was Eric who realized much, much later. I mean, it just gets crazier and crazier. I mean, like, what do you guys think? We told you guys to save your questions, and I'm not seeing any. Remember, guys, if you have questions, feel free to ask. We will be stopping periodically to respond to chat. Okay.
Or anything to add as well.
Yes. So even though Frank died from these awful experiments, this did not stop Sidney Gottlieb, not even by a bit. In 1952, Sidney Gottlieb gets this idea that they want to know at what point during sex is a man most likely to share his secrets. So they set up a web of CIA safe houses in Greenwich Village and other parts of New York and California. And it's called Operation Midnight Climax. I'm sorry. The CIA What are you doing? The CIA hired sex workers to lure non-consenting participants into these safe houses so they could run these like so-called experiments. And inside every room, there was a 2-way mirror where a CIA agent would watch on the other end and record the activity. This is what George Hunter White had to say about it. He ran one of the Greenwich Village's safe houses. Sean, I'm going to send this to you and have you read it off for the chat.
Of course, I was very hold on, I'm sorry. The clicking. Of course, I was a very minor missionary. Actually, a heretic. But I toiled wholeheartedly in the vineyards because it was fun. Where else could a red-blooded American boy lie, kill, and cheat, steal, deceive, and pillage, with the sanction and blessing of the All-Highest? Wait, this is something that George actually wrote to Gottlieb?
Yes. No, that's something that he wrote to him. Yes.
I'd heard like a lot of like George being described as kind of like a crooked cop type.
Yeah. He was like not even a cop. He was like a undercover. He was like actually like a drug lord.
Right.
They, like,
he specialized
on.
Oh, he was.
Yes.
I knew he specialized in narcotics. And I know it was said that a lot of
agent.
Oh, really? I know it was said
like
a lot of
snitch. Yes.
Oh, I know it was said a lot of the stuff that he like would confiscate, he would end up like actually doing, and he was like a big user himself. And then just like imagining this guy just like sitting away in hotels behind a mirror watching other people have sex with prostitutes. It's kind of like, what were they thinking? It's almost like, was Sidney Gottlieb on fucking acid the whole time he was coming up with these crazy experiments?
So,
I mean, he definitely was, by the way.
By his reports, he said that he had done acid at least over 300 times.
Right? Like, that, like, I just can't help but think, like, when he came up with a lot of this stuff, he was just really on one, you know?
And also, I'm just like, was it really that hard for men to figure out, like, that they had to set this whole sting operation? Like, they could have just asked, like, any woman, you know, like, when a man will reveal his secrets after, you know, during sex. After.
Just.
Right? Like, I mean, like, you know, like, I mean, it's just, like, what do they think? It's after, I guess. Like, after you get them,
I'm just like, I guess it depends on the secret. I mean, it's just like, I think that they really were convinced that like LSD was the answer to like them being honest. And it's like, no.
And then also kind of the idea that the CIA was like, were paying sex workers too.
It's funny.
And they were being paid well, from what I understand. Like, good. Like, good.
Somebody in my chat said the CIA always has the ability to fly in and out of the USA without customs, etc. Smuggling drugs was always a natural thing for them too. That it, like, they don't have to travel between customs, so that does, like, wow, I didn't even think of that.
Eliminate any issues.
Think of that either, but it makes sense because that's something else that like comes up with this as well. It's they're allowed to get away with so much. It's very, very easy to hide their tracks, I guess. You know, so during this time, Gottlieb also recruits a Canadian psychiatrist named Ewan Cameron, who by every account was just pure evil. He was known for pioneering what is called psychic driving, which is just fucking insane. What he would do is he would drug his patients to like this near comatose state with like barbiturates and opiates, and then he would inject them with amphetamines like meth or whatever, and then he would use electroshock therapy on them, like after he like shoots them up at like really high intense settings, and then he would pump them full of SD. So after that, he would put them in these dark rooms where he would experiment with things like sensory deprivation, and he would play these tracks on a loop back to back for hours and hours and hours that would just repeat the same things, like your mother hates you, for like 16 to 20 hours. And it wasn't just like your mother hates you, it was like this creepy, distorted, like overlapping, and like this like creepy, like 1950s like music. Like it seems like something like what Alfred Hitchcock would have like put together. Fucking creepy. Imagine that on acid. But some of these trials would last, like, one of these trials lasted 88 days. The goal was to completely erase the person's personality and help them build a new one. The idea is that it would cure certain mental illnesses, things like depression, anxiety, postpartum depression. These patients of Cameron's came to him looking for help, but they had their lives completely destroyed. Many of Cameron's victims reversed back to almost an infantile state. They couldn't feed themselves or talk. Some of them even had to learn how to walk again. They forgot years of their lives and didn't even know who their family was. Most people would be horrified hearing this, but not Sidney Gottlieb. He was like, And he was super impressed by Dr. Cameron. So he recruited him to be part of Mkultra. So Cameron continued to carry out these sadistic practices for Mkultra under Mkultra 68 in Canada, all while being funded by the CIA.
I just can't imagine, like, being able, like I've said, I've like experimented a little bit, and being able to do it, on my own free will is so much different than being forced to do it in an environment like that. Because doing drugs like that, it's like I don't even know how to explain it. It's just certain things will just really be triggersome and scary, like you might run into something that's just like, oh, this is dark, this is triggersome, this is scary, and you just get away from it and it's fine, you move on. But like being trapped in that sort of environment, like, just had to have made the experience honestly, like, truly scarring. Yeah, exactly.
You know what's interesting as well? While I was reading up on all of this, I found that Canada is actually once again running these test trials with LSD and acid. And I was just like, ooh, like I was kind of like, after I read this, but I'm sure it's nothing barbaric like those times. But hopefully.
We'll find out in 50 years.
But, yeah, right. So a lot of these experiments were carried out across the world. And there were all of these like secret detention camps that were operated under shell companies so the U.S. could avoid any criminal charges. These camps were set up in Germany, the Philippines, East Asia, but mostly Japan. Many of them suffered various types of torture. They were interrogated, fed LSD and other drugs, electroshocked, subjected to like crazy temperature highs and lows, as well as the sensory deprivation. Under Project Mkultra, many experiments were carried out. These experiments included the use of high doses of psychoactive drugs, especially LSD. Other drugs that were commonly used were heroin, morphine, mescaline, psilocybin, and amphetamines. And in addition to the drugs, the patient would also be subjected to electroshocks, hypnosis, sensory deprivation, isolation, verbal and sexual abuse, and any other type of torture, whatever they could think of. It's hard to say how many people were really affected by Mkultra. In total, there were 140 human experiments carried out, and 90 different institutions were involved. LSD had made its way across the United States and at every college campus. And I think it's really interesting just to kind of go back there, and we're thinking about just how our tax dollars were spent to literally torture people. It's insane. And all of these hopeful, college hopefuls or whatever, wanting to get involved in these studies that they really thought were going to better society. Yes. They didn't even know that they were subjects of the CIA most of the time.
Right. Could you imagine like doing something like that and not realizing?
Doing acid of all things. I would feel so lied to. I mean, and you know, as somebody who experiments yourself, would you say that acid is a good truth serum?
I wouldn't say necessarily that, like in that context. I don't think it makes you like, it's not like you're just going to tell all of your truths to some random person during an interrogation. Like, it doesn't work like that. I think that in some ways, maybe it can make you see yourself as you truly are, but it's not like you're just going to tell all of your secrets, you know, to other people. I think it could maybe make you like somewhat weak into, but whenever I think of like what I would be like on something like that, if somebody is asking me the important questions, I would just kind of be like,
somebody was like, well, look at this me tree. Like that.
Yeah.
I probably wouldn't be able to fucking talk. I'd be like, you know how like you'll get like,
oh yeah, true. Weird,
like sometimes you can't talk when you're tripping hard. I think I probably wouldn't be able to talk.
True.
Oh,
you know, awful. It's just, I say, get me a bed and, you know, make it look as Instagram worthy as possible. You know, these people didn't sound like they had an Instagram filter. They sounded like they had a torture filter on. And I don't know, I think that when I think about it like as a truth serum, I'm like, not necessarily. I guess it like opens my mind up to things that are true and like opens my mind up to things that have happened in the past, I guess.
Yeah.
And I'm like, okay, like hard realities.
It makes you see the truth.
But it's like, no, I'm like, if anything, it just makes me like what Casey said, you know, like, oh, look at that tree, or, you know, just look at the lines, look at the
right.
I just don't think I could know what's real versus what's not real.
Also, at the state that I like, if I had done like a lot, which I just have a feeling, especially like the unwilling participants, you know, it even says like a lot of them were given LSD every day, you know, and I'm sure they were given it in large amounts. And if you take a large amount of LSD, it's like, yeah, you're not going to be able to talk. I don't know what necessarily they were trying to get out of them or what they thought they would get out of just making somebody so like immobile, like incapacitated, right?
It's hard to say, but nearly half of the institutions involved in these experiments were colleges. But there were also many prisons and mental health hospitals involved too, which we'll also talk about. But schools like Brown, Georgetown, and Harvard were all involved with multiple different trial experiments and studies related to Mkultra. One of the Harvard students who were part of the psychological experiments was a 16-year-old Ted Kaczynski. Kaczynski was part of a humiliation experiment his sophomore year for over 200 days under his professor, Henry Murray, in which he endured various kinds of torture in the name of science. Kaczynski went on to be known as the Unabomber. In total, he mailed or delivered 16 package bombs to scientists and academics and several others over 17 years, in which he killed 3 people.
I think that he truly, after that experience, had a hate for academics and scientists. He probably saw them all as evil to a certain degree.
And like, what we know about Ted Kaczynski is he really truly was a genius. You know, he was this 16-year-old kid. He probably already felt very out of place at Harvard, and then this happens. You know, those are very, very formative years of your youth, and they really, I mean, you can harbor a lot of hate and animosity towards people during those years too, especially 16. That's a tender fucking age.
To spend like 200 days of being 16 on LSD. And for me, I guess I'll lose track of like what I'm doing and thinking. like, I had someone describe it as like you're doing 10% of like 100% task, but you'll start like 10 tasks at 10% a task, basically. So it's like, could you imagine 200 days of that?
It would be horrible. So
somebody said that he has a manifesto too. That's interesting to read.
His manifesto's pretty long, or I would have included it, but it's very long.
What's like kind of the TLDR, if you could give one?
I mean, he kind of talks about his hatred for the United States like government, like how they made him this way, and it gets weird. I don't know. It kind of it's worded in a way that's a little hard for somebody who's simple-minded to understand. It's very like it's like a speak that like a very intellectual kind of speak.
A dialectual form of speaking.
That's really honestly above me. I'll be honest. But so Henry Murray, the guy who brought like Kaczynski into all of this, he was pretty known in the area or whatever. And he actually supervised many psychoactive experiments, including Timothy Leary's. Leary said Murray was the wizard of personality assessment. And Casey, I know you like Timothy Leary, so why don't you tell chat a little bit about him?
Timothy Leary was basically just a psychologist who studied different psychoactive drugs, and he also did a lot of experimentation with them as well. He used mescaline, peyote, DMT, psilocybin, LSD, all of those things, and he felt that it could be used to treat depression. And his main goal, I guess, in doing LSD was kind of to recover the lost feelings of mystical experience that he had when he was younger. He also even synthesized the chemical psilocybin.
Yeah. So Leary also said the CIA was responsible for counterculture. And in many ways, I think that's super true. Ken Kesey, the writer of One Flew Over the Cuckoo's Nest, was also part of a test study at Stanford University. Ken didn't know until years later that he was part of a government study, but he later said that the homemade LSD never was anywhere as good as the government stuff.
I bet.
And I mean, right. Kesey also attributed the counterculture to, CIA experimentations as well.
Side note, he would also talk about how he would actually steal LSD from the universities to give out to his friends, and that's the basis of One Flew Over the Cuckoo's Nest. That's kind of the basis of his book was, his real experiences.
Well, right. And then something else, Robert Hunter, a member of the Grateful Dead, was another person involved in the experiment. Casey, will you read off what he said about his experiments?
Okay. I couldn't figure out why they were paying me to take these psychedelics. What they wanted to do was to check if I was more hypnotizable when I was on them. It was hard to pay attention to what the hell they were talking about, much less be hypnotized. It was the first time I had any of this stuff, and the drugs themselves were rather spectacular. Nobody had had my experiences, and it was at least 2 years before those drugs started getting out on the streets. It was like a secret club of one.
I'm sorry. I just think what he had to say was so funny compared to other quotes I could find that people wrote.
I think it is really interesting how the CIA actually is what brought LSD to America, and how, LSD kind of started, the flower child movement and like hippies
the
the counterculture.
Well, and the counterculture destroyed the nuclear family, is what, a lot of people say, is it destroyed the nuclear family.
It's true. It's true.
One of the many things.
Well, I mean, I think the CIA definitely did bring counterculture to the American family. I don't think it was their intention. But it's funny how that happens. It's also funny whenever you think back to this time and look at how they scheduled different drugs, which isn't something we really talk about. But I think it plays a lot into, why marijuana was scheduled to be worse than acid and mushrooms for so long, because the CIA experimented with both of those, but they found that marijuana wasn't helpful to them. But
it's a scam.
Right. But one of the prisons that was involved in the MKUltra experiments was the Atlanta prison. The experiment was to see if LSD could make a person schizophrenic, but participants were told that they were actually helping find the cure for schizophrenia. Anyone who signed up to be part of the experiment was promised to receive time off of their sentence. Participants were given LSD every day for a year, and they were fed very, very little food. Sean, I know you're kind of like a Whitey Bulger. I know he's somebody that you've been interested in. Why don't you tell chat a little bit about him?
Yeah, so Whitey Bulger was an American mob kingpin that, devastated communities around him during the 60s and 70s. He killed somewhere around 20 people, give or take, and was involved in a lot of other criminal activities. And I actually have a quote from him about his experience that I'm going to read off for chat. In 1957, while a prisoner at the Atlanta Penitentiary, I was recruited by Dr. Carol Pfeiffer. Is that Pfeiffer?
Carl Pfeiffer.
Dr. Carol Pfeiffer of Emory University to join a medical project that was researching the cure for schizophrenia. For our participation, we would receive 3 days of good time for each month on the project. Each week, we would be locked in a secure room in the basement of the prison hospital, in an area where the mental patients were housed. We went in at 9 a.m. Tuesday to 9 a.m. Wednesday. We were injected with a massive dose of LSD 25. In minutes, the drug would take over, and about 8 or 9 men, Dr. Pfeiffer, and several men in suits who were not doctors would give us tests to see how we reacted. 8 convicts in a panic and paranoid state, total loss of appetite, hallucinating, the room would change shape, hours of paranoia, and feeling violent. We experienced horrible periods of living nightmares, and even blood coming out of the walls. Guys turning into skeletons in front of me. I saw the camera change in the head of the dog. I felt like I was going insane.
I will say, his description of tripping LSD, he's definitely experiencing ego death, which is something that you'll only experience if you take you'll experience it to the extent that he is if you're taking a large dose of LSD, which of course he was, but to be able to have objects actually morph into something else, that is like I said, having experienced LSD before, that's not something that normally happens. You'll see, taking a normal dose of LSD, you'll see,
now.
Patterns and stuff change. Yeah.
That good stuff, that good LSD 25.
Yeah.
That was the good. But, I mean, the Carl Pfeiffer was, by far one of, the most sadistic motherfuckers involved in this. What he did at the Atlanta penitentiary was really disturbing. And what's really interesting is Whitey Bulger he went on after this, because this was in 1957, whenever he served time. So he went on to kind of like cause mayhem throughout the 60s and 70s. And he tried multiple times to have Carl Pfeiffer killed. Like, he said by far it was the worst thing he had ever seen anyone be put through, which you have to think he's like this fucking mobster.
Like
I don't
killer.
know.
There's a part of me, I'm not saying that I don't feel sorry for him, but at the same time it is like, well, he killed 20 people, you know, like, or more. Like, he was a killer. No wonder he had such
more.
Right? Like, I can imagine like just having a mindset like that and doing a drug like LSD. Like, you're in for a bad trip. I mean, despite the fact that you're locked away in prison with other inmates, like, you know, like, whenever I do a trip, I'm like, you know, it's all about being in a nice, comfortable setting and bright spaces outside. I cannot imagine being in a dark, you know, prison cell with, like, 8 other convicts.
Right.
Ugh.
Like, and who knows, like, what they were doing.
And
but
I think...
Go ahead.
Oh, I was just going to say, you know, like, you hear the experiences from, like, some of the college students who, you know, took it in probably not settings necessarily like the prisoners did. And, you know, a lot of them came out of it, you know, having good experiences and enjoying the drug. But then these other people who had to experience it in a much worse way, you know, just had awful scarring experiences, and I'm sure they would never want to do the drug again, obviously. You know, just being, I guess, an advocate for some psychedelic drugs, like, whenever you're in the right headspace, under the right sort of guidance, it's just sad that some people had to experience it like that. That's, you know,
especially like the best LSD that was ever synthesized. Like, I mean, it's kind of crazy, but something else, like, I mean, it wasn't just these like prisons and like colleges. There was also the mental like hospitals too that they targeted, which was horrible. I mean, like we talked about earlier, like, women would go to be treated for things like postpartum depression, and they would come out not being able to talk afterwards and would have their lives completely ripped from them. I mean, it's crazy what happened during some of this. But in 1963, the CIA decided to quit testing LSD on unknowing subjects. But this didn't stop them from testing on knowing subjects. However, this all kind of came to a big halt in 1972 during the Watergate scandal. I don't know if the CIA was tipped off or what, but the director of the CIA ordered Sidney Gottlieb to destroy all of the documents involving Mkultra. So that kind of takes us back to
will say, I know there was like this big moment where like all of the MKUltra documents were destroyed, and they did destroy a lot of them. Like, there is a lot of the experimentation that is not known about, but there have since been some documents recovered, like having to do with like purchases and stuff like that. That's like some of the information that they were able to restore from the documents that were destroyed. But anyway.
Yeah, it ended up, so not all of the documents were destroyed. Like, Gottlieb ordered like some other guy to do it for him who was under him. But there was all of these other safe houses and places, you know, that also had like these documents. Project. Right. And interestingly enough, one of Gottlieb's colleagues was actually like mailing to have like these documents destroyed, and it was like mailed to the wrong address. So like American citizens got these documents, and they were some of the people who they helped break the story.
Oh, wow.
Can you imagine getting like this mail being like, what the fuck is
right?
I'd just be like, what does the government want from me now? I already gave them my taxes.
For such like an evil scientist, like Sidney Gottlieb was just on so much acid. Like, he is just a dumbass. I don't know.
Well, you gotta burn your own mail.
Right. But this kind of takes us back to where we started. So Eric is finally getting some of the answers he has been waiting over 20 years for. What he read confirmed that his father did not commit suicide. Frank Olson was murdered. That same day, Eric calls Seymour Hersh, the journalist who originally broke the story to the New York Times, and says, "This isn't the full story. Frank Olson was my father, and the CIA lied to our family for over 20 years about his death." The next day, Hearst broke yet another devastating story to the New York Times, and the American people were fucking pissed. After this, desperate for more answers, Eric flies out to New York, and he actually checks in to the Hotel Stadler, and he requests the same room his father died in 20 years prior. Alongside were a couple of other people who suffered an enormous loss similar to Eric's. They both had parents who were involved with the experiments, and they had died under unusual circumstances. And get this, they actually performed a seance to try and make contact with Frank. I'm not sure how successful they were, but Eric said he didn't sleep that night. I don't know what happened with the seance, but that definitely hit with me because I was like, that's 100% something we would do.
Oh, we love to have our seances and our Ouija boards.
Right. So, I mean, that kind of caught my eye.
Another big account I know of Eric, like, going back to the hotel room where his father had died, fallen out the window, or jumped out the window, supposedly, was that the room wasn't big enough for somebody to be able to get a running start that quickly and bust through a window, that thick. Like, and he said that even how tall the window was up off the floor, it didn't make sense for somebody to be able to do that.
No, it made no sense. So whenever he went to this hotel, it just kind of confirmed everything he knew. But Eric was not the only person who wanted more answers. It was right off the heels of Watergate, and the American people were really fucking tired of being lied to. So in 1975, Ford set up this official investigation into the mishandlings of the CIA, including domestic activities and human experiments, as response to the New York Times article. But shortly after, a much larger investigation was started after yet another New York Times article broke. The article released new information about Mkultra and Sidney Gottlieb. It alleged that, Gottlieb had destroyed all this evidence and was directly related to the death of Frank Olson. During the new investigation, Gottlieb was investigated, but he was granted full immunity. There was no direct evidence to prove Gottlieb killed Frank Olson, but he was just more so rather a tragic result of the experiments. On July 21st of 1975, President Ford actually invited the Olsons to the White House to give them a personal apology, which has never, ever happened. And the family was promised a settlement for $1.5 million. In addition to this, they were given the never before seen documents that nobody had seen yet. These were called the Colby Documents. They asked that the family never show the files to anyone, never show the files to the press. But when they were told to sit down and take in all of this, they realized the documents that they received told a very different story about what happened to Frank Olson. And they were actually never paid the full amount that they were promised. So the documents revealed much more about Frank Olson's death. Eric became even more convinced his father was not the result of an experiment gone wrong, but an assassination. At this point, this was Eric's whole life work, and he was never going to stop until he had answers. And by this point, Gottlieb had kind of already moved on. He had long since retired, and he had created kind of a new life. He formerly spent years in India, where his life cared for patients at a hospital with people with leprosy. But he moved back to the U.S., where he was now helping children with mental disabilities. So, I mean, it really makes you think, like, what the fuck is up with Sidney Gottlieb? Who the fuck is this guy? Like, on one hand, he sounds like this fucking nut job, but then he's like, I don't know if it's just like what is it? Does he just has like two different personalities?
I think that Sidney Gottlieb truly probably believed that he was a good person deep down. I think that, you know, like you said earlier, he had this sort of like patriotism and he wanted to, you know, help the United States. And I think that he was able to reconcile with himself a lot of his wrongdoings by saying, you know, it was for the greater good. Like the purpose of, you know, figuring out how we could use this weapon of mind control was far more important than the people who were hurt, you know, in the process of finding it all out.
Right.
Right.
I feel like that was a part of it, but like, at what point do you realize? Because it just seems like they took this pleasure in it. And I think Gottlieb, like, knew what he was doing was wrong because he didn't really take great documentation of all of his experiments. Like, I feel like he knew what he was doing was wrong. I do. And something else I find interesting about him is that he was raised, both of his parents were therapists too.
Well, and somebody else brought up a good point in the chat. People feared communism that much.
I know.
That's how much people were afraid of communism at the time, you know, and all the fear tactics.
It's just funny. Like the only way an American citizen would ever become a communist was if they were
mind controlled
by somebody else. Like that was what the US was selling, which it's like, wow, the fear tactics have never really stopped, have they? But
at themselves.
Right. But in 1984, Eric finally travels to go confront Sidney Gottlieb face to face. Eric described the experience as uncomfortable. Gottlieb told him that he had dreamed about Eric nights before and said that Eric shot him in his dream. Eric was just like super put off by this, but he was still like wanting answers, so he kind of pressed him more. And at the end of this meeting, Gottlieb told him that he should join a group for family members who had lost someone to suicide, which just really, he was like, huh? You know, like it was just really weird because it was like so known that his father didn't commit suicide. But Eric later went on to even have his fucking father's body exhumed in 1994. The body had been embalmed. So the medical examiner still had quite a bit to work with. And what he found was super inconsistent with the original cause of death and the medical report. And what's also interesting is this was the first time that Eric had got to see his father. Like they didn't get to have an open casket. So this was kind of, I don't know, a lot of people say it's important to them to have that last moment with somebody that they love.
I mean, that's even another, I think, huge red flag is that the CIA told them that they couldn't have an open casket because the body... Or
a final viewing.
Right, because the body would be too mangled. And then that just not being true at all after all of those years, like another huge red flag.
What I don't understand, though, like, I do believe the CIA definitely, obviously, had a part in Frank Olson's murder.
Mm-hmm.
But, like, if I were to say someone got pushed out a window and then not have their body look like it was pushed out a window, like, I think that I would have, like, I guess with Casey's point, of like, you know, not having an open casket, it's like I still would have done the job. Like,
yeah,
if that makes sense. I'm like, oh, I'm not going to say someone did something one way and then leave the body completely intact.
Right.
And embalm it.
Right. I mean, it's weird that they had the body embalmed, but I guess that was like one of the family's choices because they were like, maybe one day we could figure out more. But I mean, like at that time, they definitely weren't where we're at now or where we were even at in 94 with this type of thing. So, I mean, and also what's, I didn't really mention this, but during this like kind of gap that we see, because you see that like Eric doesn't do anything for a while. After his family kind of gets the settlement from the government, his sister and his brother-in-law got this like private jet, and they were gonna go start this like new company, like in somewhere, and they actually died. So for this like 10-year period, like Eric was like kind of mourning, and he lost his like mother too. So like at this point in like 94, like Eric fucking has like nothing else. So he decides to have the, you know, body exam, and the medical examiner finds that Frank never jumped out of that window. He had no scrapes or cuts or anything that would even be consistent with somebody running through glass. He suffered a blow to his head right before, and right before the time of death.
Did you hear? Did you hear about how the blow to his head? There had also been some CIA documents that had been discovered where they talk like in detail about a way that you can kill a man by hitting him at a certain point in the head that was
and
consistent.
Between the eyes.
Yes, that was consistent with exactly where Frank Olson's blow to the head had been before his death.
Which, interestingly enough, was related to Project Artichoke, which Frank was part of.
Oh.
So that it's like it's hard to like go back and forth because so much of Frank Olson is related to Project Artichoke, I think. But we see him more in this because I really feel like this whole Frank Olson story is a cover-up. But at this point, Eric is just like outraged, like he's in mourning, like his whole family and like life has just kind of been stolen from him. So he fucking calls up his old buddy Seymour Hurst, and he tells him that he had been lied to. He told Hurst the story he published was a cover story for the murder of his father, and it was never a suicide. Hurst was kind of pissed off, I guess, by this and was just like, you don't know what the fuck you're talking about. But then he kind of does some digging himself, and he confirms that Frank Olson was murdered. But he told Eric he could not tell him who without revealing his source.
I wonder who the source was. I feel like it had to have been one of the 10 men that also went to that initial retreat.
I think it was Robert Lashbrook.
Or
the guy that was in the hotel room.
When it happened.
Because he was alive at this time period. And I know he was somebody that had full immunity, and I know he was somebody that Hurst investigated. So, I mean, like, it had been that long, though.
Oh, another thing.
40 years.
Another thing, it was also largely speculated that Sidney Gottlieb was in New York at the time of Frank's death, too, because he didn't really have an alibi. And there was even, like, some documentation, like, tying him into being in New York City at the time of Frank's death. Of Frank's death, but I'm not completely positive.
It was later revealed in, I think it was actually in the Wormwood documentary that it was, or maybe it was the article I read on The Guardian, but it was revealed that he was in New York at that time too. So everything about this just like reeks of like something happened. And you know what's horrible is Eric really never got that closure. He was this close And I feel like Eric might even know who killed his father. I feel Eric probably does know. But I think he'll just never quit talking about it because he's made this his entire life now. Like, Eric was a Harvard graduate student turned, like, crime sleuth. You know? Like, this wasn't going to be Eric's life, but I think Eric was the perfect person to do this. I don't know that anybody else could have handled all of these graphic details in the way that he did so well. But I mean, that's kind of almost the end for the Olsons. We do talk about them again, but in 1980s, 9 of Cameron Ewan's victims filed a case against the United States government. This is where they held the Canadian experiments. And each of them were rewarded $750,000, but Cameron had already died at this point. He died like way back in 1967, and he never faced any charges. And he was like really known to just be this very successful, like, therapist and psychologist, like very highly regarded of that time. But he was truly a monster.
So no one served any time for any of the Mkultra experimentation?
No. Like, not a single person. Everyone that was involved was granted full immunity. Everyone.
So it's like they all were doing things wrong, and were all given a free pass.
Yeah. I guess that's like what the government is. But Errol Morris did do a documentary about this in like 2017 too, called Wormwood. And you guys should watch it. He actually does it with Eric Olson. And he kind of describes like Mkultra as catnip for conspiracy theorists, which I think is 100% true. And that's why I think stories like this are so important to cover in this era of misinformation. There are still so many unanswered questions to this day, which has made a lot of conspiracy theorists think that these experiments are still carried out to this day. What do you guys think?
Are these sorts of experiments still being carried out to this day? Yeah, I think that there's definitely like I don't know. It's just hard to believe that it's ended. Maybe I would think that the experimentation probably isn't done so much on US citizens, but probably other sorts of like prisoners of war type thing, or like in other countries. I think of
Guantanamo Bay too.
Yep.
Thank you all so much for joining this week of the Recreational Podcast. We're now going to move on to the portion of the show where we kind of start answering viewer questions. So if you guys have any questions for us, now is the time. We hope you enjoyed, and make sure to tune in next week. Another conspiracy around Mkultra is like
Bruce
John
Benet Ramsey.
Jean Benet.
I'm like, that would be another good topic to cover.
Yeah.
I mean, if you've got a minute.
I feel like this was great, though. How do you guys feel?
I mean, I think it was a good topic. I mean, to hear that the government spent $10 million, in the 60s on LSD, when really in terms of 2021, it's nearly $90 million. That's a little upsetting, but it's great that people were able to get the really good stuff for free.
I mean, I think it's like an interesting part of history. I mean, there's so much to learn, just like looking back at our own American history, because we're not taught so much. Like, this isn't something we were taught about in school, not something I was taught about in school. So, I mean, I think it's really important just to look back.
Well, you know, if you don't know your history, you don't know where you're going.
I had a big misconception on MKUltra until now. I did too. I had such a misconception. Honestly, yeah. I thought you could have tied it to how the CIA planted drugs against the Black community and ruined their advancement in a predominantly white-dominated society. I guess I feel like that's a whole other topic.
Yeah.
And I'm just like, I don't know how much, like, 3 white people should talk about it. I'm not saying that we shouldn't.
That was actually a huge thing that was tied into it, because there were a lot of people unknowingly that were drugged in, you know, Black communities especially. Mm-hmm. That was something that was actually, like, noted quite a bit, but I tried to find stuff on this. I couldn't find like sources like the New York Times and the Washington Post like I could find for everything else, unfortunately. It's I mean, it's another sad part of our history.
Yeah, I mean, that could be almost its own podcast, like you said.
Mm-hmm. It's like, I don't know, just the erasure of Black history really has been something that's been happening in America.
Oh no, cash gaming. It was a good one to bring up. I didn't take that like negatively at all.
No, it was an excellent point, and that's something I thought about, you know, including. It was just,
well, it's like I kind of like
there was a lot of research involved in this, and a lot of time writing it. I honestly don't know how I could have covered that part as well.
Oh, somebody said, I think it's the CIA Contra stuff where they were selling crack in the inner cities to finance overturning socialist regimes. Yeah, like a lot of that going on.
The government in general just like contributing to the
and the say problem. No to drugs. Well, it definitely ties to the whole like Reagan campaign. Mm-hmm. Just say no. There's a big tie to it as well. A lot of people speculate, and I mean, I believe abolish prison. Yeah. No, I mean, as Lizzle says, American schools teach us what they want us to know, and we need to keep educating ourselves on American evils. It's true.
And, you know, that was kind of one of the points of, like, us starting this podcast. Me and Holly and Sean were just like, you know, we need to learn more. We need to educate ourselves more. And I guess, like, being able to talk about these different things to others and educate others as best we can, you know, within our means.
Right.
I think is good for us.
You know, we don't have a college degree amongst us, so it's really just about learning these things and discussing it weekly, so we can have a topic that we can talk to people who did go to college about.
Right. Yeah, we are, like, we've talked a lot about how, like, once we get more comfortable with our own flow of the podcast, because you guys have all seen, like, how all of our different episodes have gone with being, like, a little bit different. But once we get more comfortable with our flow with each other, we're going to like start inviting on like different guests and stuff like that. George the Onion said, are you guys going to talk more about CIA stuff like the Operation Condor and other podcasts dedicated CIA expose episodes periodically would be fun? I'm like, George, we've talked about doing a Beanie Babies episode soon. So, stay tuned for that.
That's the one you're most excited for?
Oh,
is that one of the ones
Beanie Babies.
Do you want to do Beanie Babies, Casey?
Oh, I mean,
you can do Beanie Babies if you want to do Beanie Babies.
I mean, maybe I will. I
don't know.
Do you know another one that I would like to talk about soon that I think we all could like talk about is Michael Jackson.
Oh, true.
You know, we all grew up during that time where, like, it was just, like, there was a Michael Jackson interview playing on the TV somewhere. There was a Michael Jackson interview on TV. I saw so many.
Yeah. something with Michael, a baby over a blink, over a balcony. We were always hearing about Michael. And, next week on Recreational Use, the innocence of Michael. I'm kidding. That's going to be another story.
Get Solo on podcast when? Solo, maybe you'd be a good person to have join us sometime for a true crime one or something.
Solo always just knows so much about true crime, and like Holly and I both know a lot about true crime stuff too. I just think that our biggest thing is like we just don't pay attention to like names and dates.
Oh, Catch Gaming said we were intelligent and that we don't need a degree to tell us that as a college grad. It's not important. Wow, thank you.
It's true. It's true. I think college can be really beneficial to some people, but I don't think everybody needs college to do what they want.
Yeah, not everyone needs to do college for a podcast.
Two of Michael Jackson's sons have a YouTube channel where they just review movies. What? Oh, I'll have to look into that.
Honestly,
so you're saying Blanket is reviewing movies?
Love that. You know what else I kind of like think is interesting? Like you said Michael, and I thought you were gonna say Michael Jordan's father. Like I don't know why, because like Michael Jordan's father, James Jordan, was murdered.
Oh, really?
Not a lot of people know that. But Michael Jordan's father was murdered.
How old was he when he was murdered? Do you know?
So this was right around whenever Space Jam came out. So this is whenever Michael Jordan actually left the NBA, and then he went and did baseball for a while. So it was like maybe 2 or 3 years before he did Space Jam, his father was murdered.
Oh, wow.
Yeah. That's not something I learned until recently, and I was like, oh, wow, how did I never know that? But you know what? Okay, something I just had to like bring up though about Earl Morris doing this documentary on Mkultra too, and kind of like about LSD. It made me think of Hamilton, his son, Hamilton Morris, and I was just like, so what is their relationship like? Are they close? So I had to like look into that too, because and then whenever I looked up Earl Morris, I guess he is actually a chemist as well. Like that's his background, and then he went on to become a journalist. But they're actually working on doing another podcast about Timothy Leary, or another documentary about Timothy Leary, Hamilton Morris and Earl Morris together,
father-son. I love Hamilton.
Yeah, I did too. I mean, I thought it was like
The Thin Blue Line is such a crazy documentary to watch. It's just like, what?
Right. There's a conspiracy that he was killed because MJ owned people a lot of money gambling. Yeah, I've heard that conspiracy too. Yeah. But I mean, I really feel like this one went good. There's definitely like so many other questions I'm sure you guys might have about Mkultra. We can probably actually answer because we've read so much and consumed so much content on this. If you guys have questions,
I had it playing on the TV. I just had different things playing on the TV about Mkultra all day.
It's an interesting topic to learn about. It really is. And it's like very well documented. You know, I just thought it was a conspiracy theory. I didn't realize that there was like so much like actual documentation and like government files and stuff like that on it being an actual real thing. The government, the CIA murdered someone.
Right.
It's proven. Well, it's not only that they murdered someone, but it got proven.